So here's the project for the Matrix Club to Death. It's at various tempos from 126 BPM to 102 at the beat section. That's the opening, and the closing is at 90 BPM. So let's have a listen. So that's the track. Now let's get to looking at the individual instruments. Before we begin, I like to have the mindset of approaching this not as let's get every sound to be exactly like the sound of the original, more like let's capture the emotion and the texture and the spirit of the original sounds and why do they sound so great working together. Now, of course, the strings in that track, to me they sound like orchestral strings, really live, recorded orchestral strings. We're going to try to recreate that in this song, and that's what you hear at the listening of the track. So you have all these string instruments here, which is under studio strings stereo. You can find them under studio strings. And let's look at the first one, violins legato. So it's playing the melodic line of the opening section. Now, this one is playing the harmonies, the violas. So you go on the strings, you can see it's violas, and this one is violins 1. And you can see there's some heavy EQing going on, because in the original recording, it's pretty sort of lo-fi-ish, if I could say so. So we took out quite a lot of frequencies to bring out that harshness. You see, without the EQ, it's this open, very rich sound, whereas this one's a little bit more boxy. And I think that works to get that mood. And you can see the violas are the same. We removed quite a lot of frequencies and boosted a little bit of the mids. So they sound a little bit boxy, which kind of works for this. It's got a bit of that lo-fi thing going along. And you can see they've been sent to bus 1 and aux 1, which has a space designer. And in this case, it's a large space under Hall's big string reverb. That's exactly what we want, which is 100% wet, 0% dry. And it's quite generous bit of sending over there, so you can hear that space. It's quite a long sort of Hall-like reverb. So you can see that working together. Now, you can see these two underneath here. They're kind of doubling the same thing. And you can see that the textures of these are very different from this. This one's very small sections of sound. This is really smooth and large, and when you pair them, it's a nice little, like, you get some forward signal and you get some sort of wider signal. So they become this one sound, and I'm always for layering sounds if one sound gives you a part of a sound and the other sound gives you the other part of the sound. Same with the violas. So if you pair them all, also you can see that there is automation going on with this. So with strings, if you want to give them life, especially for sampled strings, you need to do a lot of automation. And in this case, we did volume automation. And you can do CC automation as well in the strings. If you want, you can say dynamics via CC, you can turn it on and you can use your mod wheel to give it more sort of dynamics. In this case, we didn't do that. But just to illustrate, we did do dynamics on the basses. So in this case, you see there's a double bass track with the same sort of, a little bit interestingly, this double bass is really deep, so we took off some of the low end and sent it to the same Hall reverb, and you can see that there's a CC track here. So I just duplicated this track, which is controlling the same instrument, and you can see the CC track here. So you can see that controls the dynamics of the thing. Dynamics via CC is on. So the mod wheel recording is doing the sort of modulation for the dynamics of the bass. Now, you can hear a little bit of cellos coming in at the start. And it's the same thing. They're under strings, cellos, articulation, sustain. And yeah, so that combination of all these tracks create that opening string track. So I think it's great to understand the different textures of the string libraries that you have, because there's no one that's better than the other. It's just that they are different tools, and different string libraries give you different sizes, different feelings, and sometimes they have mic placements that can give you a feeling of space or a more intimate feeling. So it's more about options and mixing them around to get the kind of sound you want. You don't have to stick to one library and say, oh, they're all sitting in the same hall, so I need to have one particular string library. I think when you're doing it in the box, use whatever tools you can to make them sound good. Now on to the beats. This is the drum beat, which is this classic sort of 90s vibe. So let's get to it. Let's start with the sort of heavy stuff, right? I believe that's the bass over here. And that is a track. If you open up, you can see that under factory drums and percussion, electronic drum kits, drum and bass remix. So the kick is from that drum and bass remix. And what I tend to do is to mix and match different stock libraries, different kicks for different snares and different sections, so that you can get a more flexible drum kit. And in this case, yeah, this one is unprocessed. It's just a drum and bass remix kick. Pretty straightforward. And you have a snare here. It's more like a clap. And that's under dance remix, under electronic drum kits. So you get this pattern. Not particularly great. So we need to add more layers. And in this case, you can see that we added an acoustic drum kit under dry standard kit. And there's a snare here. And you can see that there's a compressor. And I tend to like to use Studio Fat for really sort of punchy stuff. Studio Fat's great for that kind of sound. And yeah, you can see the settings right over here, and without, just a bit more snappiness to the sound. And you can see that at the snare, it's being sent to bus 2, which has a space designer, large space hall, dark piano hall, 100% wet. And yeah, it's got this nice ambience to it. Paired with the claps. And then one more snare under single drum snares, acoustic snares, D19, and sounds like that. So you can see all these different textures, and sent to bus 2 as well, working together, all giving different sort of sounds that add to the mix. And then we have sort of like a hat thing going, which is under drums and percussions, acoustic drum kits, Roadhouse kit. So they kind of loose open hats, a semi-open hat kind of thing. And sounding more like that 90s vibe. And then I tend to like to use toppers to sort of give it a little bit more sort of rhythm to it. So in this case, you can see that the channel EQ is really, really narrow. Sometimes I use this EQ tools, phone filter notch, sometimes wideband. And in this case, sort of just gives it a very small sound. And when you put it together, so you can see that this particular topper just add that organic sound onto the hats so that it doesn't sound too robotic. And without, so yeah, that's basically the drum kits. Some stuff comes in like later over here. You hear a little bit of like a really dirty drum kit on top of that, so it's layered as well, and it's basically drums and percussions, electronic drum kit, a big beat Remix drum kit. So it's a full drum kit, but you can see that there's a lot of processing going on. The EQ is really taking out a lot of stuff. So there's just this boxy mid-range here. There's distortion. I'm using the distortion 2. There's bit crushing going on. And then there's compression. And this one is a platinum, really smooth compression. So I want it to just have the levels to be pretty smooth. And yeah, you hear it together with everything. So it adds a little something if you want to sort of raise the stakes, raise the energy a little bit. And at another point, you can see that this comes in. And it's very simple tambourine, and I find that tambourines are great to give that, that extra rhythmic bounce to it. In this case, it's under the South American Latin kit. So it's pretty straightforward. Take out some frequencies that we don't really want, and what you get is this. And with the next layer, so that is the bass and rhythm section. Now, let's get into some string sounds, like back to string sounds. Now you can see that these are EXS strings too, so I know that they're on the smoother, larger side. So they send to bus 1 as with the other strings, and you can see that they're supplementing the cellos and the basses here. So they sound like an individual cello and an individual bass, right? But they're very forward, so you can sort of layer them. So you could say that these ones are in front and these ones are supporting these two over here. So if you find that some of your layers aren't sort of rich enough, you can add a complementary layer on top of it. And I do that with synths too. But in this case, with strings, it works fine as well. Now there's a sort of like sound effect type thing. And yeah, it's pretty easy to design. This was using ES2, which is the synthesizer tool, one of my favorite synthesizers in Logic. And I used the synth brass, fair brass. You could use it with a brass sample as well, maybe a brass staccato. And basically it's just playing the notes like chromatically. With a delay, a stereo delay. And it's set like that. Pretty much a default setting, and a channel EQ, and you can see that this one's pretty aggressive as well. This song has quite aggressive EQ. Let's take it out and have a listen. It's pretty dark, mid-dark kind of thing, not much brightness to it, so we added the brightness, took out the low end. Once again. So you can see that trumpety kind of sound is more there and kind of works in context. And yeah, that's how I always feel about sound design. Like if you have an idea in your head, you got to know the right tools to get the right sound. And if you think about it, like the bass sound is kind of close, and then you just use processing to get the sound to the sort of last mile of the sound that you want. And that's how I approach all the creation and sound design of my tracks. Now, there's this other sound element here. And you can hear that it's really dry. But in context, it kind of works. So not everything has to be drenched in the same reverb that everything else is drenched in. And in this case, we use an alchemy patch, and this sound is called Meta Growler under sound effects. And let's just remove the EQ, and here's kind of how it sounds. Just It's kind of like a squeaky type sound. But what we did is add a pitch bend. So you can see there's a pitch bend. Let's see, where's pitch bend? You can see there's pitch bends happening here. So you kind of get that sort of whine, and then it's too rich. So we're limiting the EQ to something like that, and to make it smaller. And I always find that in a mix, I only like to leave in the frequencies that I want, especially for more sound effecty type things. I feel like I don't need too rich sound effects and stuff like that. All the low end and all the high end, that's kind of getting lost in the mix anyway. I just isolate the frequencies that I want so that I have space for other things. You don't always need to do that, especially for your main lines, but I find that I tend to do that so that I have more sort of sonic energy to be used somewhere else. And then there's a sound effect. It's this one is really processed. So what we have is a peaking opera vocal. All right, let me show you. This one's pretty interesting. Peaking opera vocal. Let's see, this one's FX03. So it's really a vocal kind of thing going on, right? Let's take everything out. Sounds like this. And then we added a ring shifter, and this ring shifter is kind of set at the default setting. So it gives it that little wobbly kind of feeling. And then there's a vocal transformer, and you can see that the pitch has been pushed up to 2 octaves, and the formant has been brought down a bit. The mix is at 100%, so you don't hear any of the original sound. It's starting to sound completely different from the original, right? And then we EQ'd a lot of the high end out and gave it a ridiculous mid-band boost. So it sounds like this. And then when you add a delay, it gives it a bit more space, right? So the delay sounds like... So in context, it kind of works too. So that's the thing. Sometimes things by themselves don't sound great, but when you put it in context, then it might work really well, and then you try to figure out how to carve out the frequency so that it sits well. Now we got this other groove on top here, and it's sort of complementing this big remix. It's really busy, but I find that it kind of works as well, and that's why you call it busy groove. And this one's interesting because it's in Alchemy. And Alchemy, you have beats as well under Rhythmic, and you'll find that there are various beats that you can use as sort of like either toppers or complementary beats. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, it just adds another layer on top. Another sound design element is this sound here. It's kind of like a horn type sound, but we found that this instrument under World South Asian Indian Chennai Oboe works good for this section. So in context, it works really well. And if you notice, the violins here are sort of split into legato and staccato. And why do we do that? Let's have a listen. So you can see that the sort of quicker lines are played by the staccato track, and the longer lines are played by the legato. And you can hear that it's not really smooth or realistic. But in context, I always talk about putting sounds in context, right? they sound fine. So have a listen. So when you have a song, a lot of things kind of work together and no one's paying attention to one single element. And you can do a lot of sort of cheating, if you want, for want of a better word, because these strings and all, obviously you don't have access to an orchestra, but you can make them work as well. So don't be too worried that, oh, you know what, when I solo them, they sound really unrealistic. Yeah, it's fine. So experiment with sounds in context, and I think it will help you a lot. Now, you can see a subby bass here as well. So under sampler, you see bass, electric bass, subby bass. It's just this, sometimes you need some sort of low end. And this is sort of like working together with the beat. So with this kind of low subby bass, so you just pair them with the kicks. Just for that extra bit of bass, yeah, it just works. And here's the cymbal. You can kind of take them from anywhere, but I took them from Drums and Percussion, Electronic Drum Kits, Eurodance Remake. So you can kind of use the various cymbals in the various kits and you see which one's more suitable. So this one just works in that context. Now you can see the progression of the layers happening and more layers happening. And then they kind of change. Like you can see this one starts playing a more staccato pattern. So you go from this legato sort of pattern to this staccato pattern, and that's how sort of the rhythm changes. And you can see that when we enter this section, the extra beats actually drop off. The busy grooves, the big beat remakes, yeah, the cash topper, they drop off. So let's hear the transition. So we're not adding any new instruments, but you can see that because of the change in sort of arrangement, the feeling changes as well. And I think that's important to note. And you can see that more elements start coming back in again. And this is this sort of lead, sort of retro sounding lead line, which you can find in Alchemy, huge echo lead. And it sounds like that. And we took off a lot of the low end as well in the EQ because it wasn't really required, and it sounds in context. And you can see that it's followed by another Alchemy patch called Metallic Edge Lead, and it's sort of this sparkly sound. So it's kind of like follows this. That sort of ringy thing could be done with delay as well, but in this case, we just played the MIDI. So yeah, it sounds like that. And you can see that once it hits the end of it, we have a reverse crash. And that one you can sort of get from your library as well. Reverse crash. Oh, this one over here. You can pick any reverse crash that you want from your libraries. You can as well sometimes, I think this one what I did was I created a crash from one of the crash tracks and then I reversed it. So how you reverse something, you can just double click it here. Oh no, under file, that's right. Under functions, you can go to reverse the file. So that's how you get a reverse file. And you can see that there is a tempo change here. Now how do you do tempo changes in Logic? In case you don't know, you can press T and it brings up a tempo map, and you can go to anywhere and just add a tempo thing. So whenever, say you're here, you can add a tempo change. And then you can drag and change the tempo. But we don't need that. So there's a tempo change here. And it goes to a Steinway piano, very straightforward sampler Steinway piano 2 under acoustic pianos. Send to bus 2, which is the dark piano hall. Yep. And yeah, it's a pretty straightforward piano track. Now, one thing to notice though is that the melody that plays on top of it here is that it's a different track. So sometimes I split a piano because the rhythm or the left hand playing is on one track and the right hand playing is on another track. You can see that there's a bit more reverb and a bit more level on this. So it kind of brings it out a little bit. So it's easier to control, like saying that the right hand is playing a little bit more forte, mezzo forte here. And yeah, and you can see that the violins are the violin staccato, pretty straightforward. And these are not the string ones, these are under orchestral strings, violins 1 staccato. So this is a different one and we wanted that sound. And instead of a bus send, which I have turned off, you can turn it on and off here, I place a space designer in line. This is called an insert, right? And it's 100% wet. So it's this big string reverb and it just fits the sound. So sometimes you need a fully wet reverb track. Instead of sending it where you have your dry signal, you can just put an insert and just have it be fully wet. And I think it fits this whole piano line. And you can see that I am mixing reverbs. This space designer reverb for the strings are big string reverb, whereas the piano one is under, I think, dark piano reverb somewhere. Yeah, somewhere here, dark piano hall. They're similar in length, but they're different in sort of the response. So it's okay to mix reverbs and even stuff with no reverb. It's more about the taste of where you want it to sort of sit within the space of the song. And that's about it. I hope you download the track and have a play around and sort of discover for yourself what things are. Turn on reverbs, turn them off, turn on EQs, turn them off, try your own versions and see how they sound like. And I'm very keen to sort of have you explore that and learn for yourself. So happy music making and enjoy the project.